For those with drive, the Standard H podcast focuses on the lives and the stories of those who have started or contributed in the growth of companies. This episode's guest easily fulfills the latter category and has done so in a major way. He's a watch journalist, an automotive journalist, he co-hosts one of my favorite podcasts, the Grey Nato, and he's certainly no slouch in the photography department. Of course, I'm talking about James Stacey. During what can only be described as Hodinkee's meteoric rise, James has contributed to some of my favorite Hodinkee segments, so I was looking forward to hearing a bit more about his background. As a writer, he discusses the importance of developing your own voice. We absolutely talk about his fascination for gold watches. And since he's hosted a few episodes of Talking Watches, Hodinkee's flagship product, James offers us a backstage pass into what filming an episode entails. We go fairly deep on some car talk as well as photography, including what gear he's been using, as well as how he typically captures watches. We wrap things up on a more personal note, and James shares his weakness for female singers. James and I caught up several weeks ago, making this episode a Standard H podcast first by way of recording over Zoom. We each settled in with some bourbon, so perhaps you'd like to do the same. This was a super fun conversation, so I hope you enjoy it. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard H podcast. Well, let's just jump into it, I guess. You've heard some of the podcasts. Thank you so much for listening.
My pleasure. It's great.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a little town, 80, 90K out of Toronto called Caledonia, Ontario. So like a 10,000 person town, kind of cut kind of in half by a river.
Yeah.
One couple high schools, pretty simple zone.
Now, were the high schools on opposite sides of the river and like rivalrous?
No, I mean, so there's basically one main high school. There's a handful of public schools. There's like one main high school for Caledonia proper, and then we had rivals that were Cayuga and Dunnville and Hagersville and these other like kind of farming communities, which is loosely what Caledonia kind of started as. So.
Right. And you were not a participant of team sports, just based on my understanding.
No, not athletically inclined. Really, no sense of competition.
So what were you doing in high school, free time?
Yeah, I mean, it was the other stuff that you do, right? Like you'd play guitar, you walk around with friends, you go to Tim Hortons and get a coffee or beef jerky at the corner store or something like that. It's a small town kind of stuff. I got into video games pretty deeply.
Okay.
From maybe around the time that the PlayStation 1 came out, so I would have been fairly young at that point, and then on from there. But yeah, just the usual. I was lucky enough to grow up on a part of town that still had, and now most of it's been turned into developments, but had like a conservation area and then a bunch of kind of open farmers fields. So if you wanted to get outside with a slingshot on a sunny afternoon, you could. So that was the mode for a long time. And if it was raining, yeah, you'd play some video games.
Sweet. Yeah. What did mom and dad do?
My dad is a public servant, so he worked for the Ontario government in various levels. At one point, he was, his career in government work sort of started as a probation officer, and then he eventually became kind of upper level management for various community outreach projects. And Ontario government has a lot of involvement in protecting and ensuring the rights and comforts of disabled peoples.
Oh wow,
or differently
that's awesome.
abled peoples. So that was kind of where his career sort of wrapped up.
That's awesome.
And my mom, stay-at-home mom as I grew up, and then always ran a daycare, and she still does that to the day. Nice,
that's great. What you hated school, right?
I hated a lot of elements of school. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it goes back and forth. Like the social elements always seem pretty opaque to me, especially growing up like in a small town. I've been fortunate enough to, have a lifestyle that was a little bit more metropolitan, and you meet more people.
Right.
And a wider range of people and experiences, which is really a gift. But growing up in a relatively small town, if you didn't play hockey and you didn't play football and you didn't want to stand in a field around a bonfire and drink beer, underage, as we do in Canada, of course, then you kind of had to make your own fun because you instantly limited your social group. But yeah, school was a mixed bag. I had a couple amazing teachers, and those are topics that I still apply to today. I had a couple great tech teachers. I had a couple fantastic teachers in sort of computer sciences and creative uses of computers, recording audio, video, editing, that sort of thing.
Cool.
And the same with English. But yeah, when it came to the general structure and that many rules and schedules and tests and all that kind of stuff, yeah, it wasn't really a strong match for me.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Did you go to university around Toronto?
I went to university in Hamilton, so there's a fairly well-regarded university called McMaster, which would be a good spot to get a health sciences, move into being a doctor. There's a huge teaching hospital connected to it, and it's also one of Canada's better platforms for a business degree.
Okay.
I did neither of those things. I went through for as fast as I could a sociology degree. I think it was more of a means to an end. I thought once I got to that point, someone would be offering me all this money for a job that I would find interesting and fulfilling. And of course, we all know how that goes. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So what were the first gigs out of school?
I put myself through school selling computers at what would become Best Buy. At the time, Best Buy was in Canada, but they were kind of not competing with because they shared some ownership with another kind of electronics retail chain called Future Shop. So I sold computers at Future Shop all through university, finished university, and felt like that was, I was wrong, but I felt like that was beneath me and I needed to show some sign that I had achieved a certain level of maturity. I started working for a bank.
Okay.
Which lasted like 90, 92, 93 days, and I quit. I think I just barely made it through my like probational period.
Yeah.
And it was so boring. It was a bank in an old neighborhood, mostly filled with old people who weren't even buying mortgages. So I was like, I had a BA, I had a fair amount of financial training, as much as you could cram into a couple months. I had a certification for selling certain types of monetary vehicles, and I would spend all my time just like literally hand printing bank books, if you remember what a bank book is.
Yeah. So then I guess, I don't know, maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't working at the bank, but like what were some of the big lessons learned at Future Shop?
The lessons at Future Shop were like you had to cut your teeth with being personable, even if you aren't necessarily that personable of a person. And there's also that skill set of talking about something that doesn't intrinsically matter to you. It matters to the point of your conversation.
Okay.
So if you imagine, if I don't actually care, like at a high level, I don't care if anyone ever bought a computer because it had no effect on me, aside from the fact that it was my living.
Right.
So you would be invested in the conversation to that one. And then once you get past a certain threshold of understanding how customer interactions and really just being a person and a human being and having like adult helpful conversations with somebody else goes, it starts being really rewarding because you start seeing patterns in how people speak to you and what they see and what their values are. And once you can start to align that with something, like that's the most fun part of sales. I don't think I was ever a great salesperson, but I did really enjoy, kind of identifying what someone really needed and finding something where you saw that person 2 years later, and of course you wouldn't remember them, but they'd be like, oh, you're that tall guy with the floppy hair that sold me my kid's computer. Well, that computer made it all the way through the university. It never broke.
That's awesome.
And you get that kind of stuff. So that was kind of thing. And the bank, I think, taught me an even more important lesson, which is if you're not proactive in staying in a lane that makes you happy, you can really feel the walls close in, and those walls closed in a couple months.
Right.
Something was like, is there any difference between, I could literally, if I wanted to, I guess you could be doing this for the next like 40 or 50 years.
Right.
And it's just atrophy is what it felt like.
Yeah. So what came first, cars or watches in your life?
Cars.
Yeah. How so?
A friend of my father's, still a very close family friend, an entrepreneur in the kind of Hamilton, Caledonia area to this day, and in various different projects. His name is Steve. He bought me car magazines when he was a kid. He didn't have his own family, like his own kids yet. His kids were very young at the time.
Oh, I see.
And so we would kind of go and hang out and have donuts. My dad and my brothers and Steve and this kind of thing. And we used to go to auto shows when I was a bit older, Toronto Auto Show and such. But all that started with like 1992 Road and Track, McLaren F1 on the cover.
Oh yeah,
I have it here.
So that is the impetus of the love affair with cars, then the actual magazine right there in front of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I always grew up in a household where my parents were, very much about anything we were interested in. Lots of encouragement, lots of stability and that sort of thing. But, my dad appreciates cars. I wouldn't call him a car guy necessarily, maybe more so as we've become friends as I've gotten older. But this came from a couple of magazines when I was a kid. And, Steve drove an E36
cool.
3 Series.
Yeah.
And it was the first time that I'd been in a car, I think, with like anti-lock brakes, and you could really, a first time where a car like was more visceral than transportation.
Yep.
And yeah, so that was the start of that. Watches came after university.
Sure. Yeah. So then, well, I mean, you've done a bit of car writing as well as journalism for watches, clearly, as someone working for Hodinkee. So did car writing go first as well?
No, car writing came a lot later.
Interesting.
I started in watches, just kind of researching things that I was interested in. And I don't think I ever, even up until like not that long ago, would have thought that I could have found a spot to work in the car industry, like in the automotive journalism community.
Sure.
Just because that's your dream stuff. You know, watch bloggers didn't exist when I was a kid, but automotive writers certainly did. The great ones had come and gone by that point, by the early 90s, right? And there was, multiple great generations to come. Mm-hmm. And with writing about watches, it was more of it was kind of just a stone that started rolling and gathered speed over time. It started by reading everything I could find, but that was in 2006, 2007, so there wasn't that much online.
Right.
Certainly not for really entry level. If you were deep into time zone and you knew the right people, all the information was there. But as far as like blogs and stuff, this is pre-Hodinkee, this is pre-A Blog to Watch, this is pre-almost everyone, really. It was just Watch Report at the time, and I ended up writing for them, and it kind of went from there.
Yeah, it's funny. I always had a special watch, and I like looking back, like kind of hindsight being 2020. I guess I've always sort of been a watch guy, even unbeknownst to me to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. But it really took off like right in 2007, and on like for the high end horology type stuff.
Sure.
And I mean, it was literally nothing more than me moving to LA that summer or spring, it was April, and walking down Rodeo Drive. And then finding out, like,
seeing all that was there.
What's IWC? What's JLC? Sure. Like, what are all these brands that are quite literally next door to one another as Richemont? And yeah, so then it was just like, it was like the doors opened, and I was just hooked.
And I mean, I totally see that, and I bet you by that time I hadn't been to more than a handful of cities in my whole life that had boutique rows.
Totally.
Where they would have a street with all the watch brands on it. And then in a few years, by the time I was more familiar with that sort of scene, the names had already started to change. Suddenly there were Panerai boutiques. And like when you or I were first kind of, if you're roughly the same time as me, like Panerai was an underground thing appreciated by 300 people.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it was like everyone had to have an 005. Everyone had to have a pig. Everyone had to have a black seal, and like it just kind of took up speed from there, and they really changed the face of watches. But that was the first thing I wrote about was Panerai.
Yeah.
May or April 2008, I guess.
Oh wow. So yeah, you've been deep into it. Well, you were still working full time though, right? Like while doing that.
Yep. Yeah. So at the time, when I first started writing, I probably didn't have a job. What was I doing? Yeah, I was down in Mississippi, so I wasn't working at the time. I was probably taking some time off. I had some family in Mississippi.
Okay, like that's a departure.
That was some family that was there for kind of a certain period of a few years for work in the steel industry in eastern Mississippi. And I was down there during the summer. I was probably just out of university and just took some time off of selling computers, and then I ended up making the move from the bank into construction. Construction led to a badly damaged finger that came in contact with a saw.
Oh, no way.
And then, faced with the fact that I wasn't going to have an illustrious construction career. I really loved framing houses, but it was probably not something I was well suited for. I went into tech support with a couple buddies who were working for a small cable company in Hamilton, Ontario, called Mountain Cable, and that led to to make it as fast as possible. That company was then bought by Shaw Cable, which is like Canada's Comcast, like a huge company.
Okay,
12,000 employees at the time, something like that, and then I ended up moving from Toronto to Vancouver, and maintained a role in Vancouver with Shaw Cable, but now developing. If you've ever been on like Apple's self-help platform, like Apple Help or Apple Troubleshooting, that kind of stuff, it was the same sort of thing, but for Shaw's platform. So we wrote, at one point I knew the number, 10,000 documents or something, basically over the course of 4 or 5 of us. For a little while, it was just 2 of us.
Wow.
And then we started producing videos and maintaining a whole community, like essentially a Facebook-esque community, internalized both for staff and then external for customers for this company. And eventually just there was no possible upward mobility, like full stall out.
Glass ceiling.
I didn't really I don't know, like I suppose so at a certain point, but I had a set of skills that was more towards the creative side. And this was your formal, like, everyone has 8 managers. Do you want to be a manager? No. Well, then you should probably just keep doing what you're doing until you want to be a manager. So that at that point, it was just a question of shuffling a few things around and making sure that I could make something like a monthly average, something like a monthly wage,
right?
By writing and doing some photography. And I lined up Hodinkee, and then also editor-at-large position with Nouveau magazine, which is based in Vancouver as well, a fantastic luxury magazine, one of the best in Canada, certainly.
Sure.
And I was their kind of automotive guy. And I had a handful of other clients as well that were, between white label watch work and kind of weird corners of the car industry. I wrote a bunch for Progressive Automotive. They had a blog, kind of like self-help, but for cars, like how to boost your battery, how to change your tire,
cool.
what you should have in your trunk, like simple stuff.
But useful.
I loved it. Yeah. It
great. That's awesome. What, well, you've already mentioned the F1 then, and on kind of the topic of cars, do you have any like affordable grail, so to speak, considering an F1 is $15 million car now?
Yeah. I mean, a bad one would be 15 right now.
Right. Yeah.
15 now. Yeah. Maybe. Affordable grails. I mean, I still think that there's an almost unlimited amount of potential in the vintage alpha community.
Sure.
GTV 1750s, anything that's rear wheel drive would be fine. And I like the Fulvia, of course, has a huge following, but it's front wheel drive. They're just gorgeous, special things, and they're firmly under $100,000.
Sure.
And don't get me wrong, like affordable is a relative concept, of course, but you see these on Bring a Trailer, $40,000 or $50,000, and like if I drive a somewhat ratty, oldish JK Wrangler Jeep, and if I was to go replace that, that's like 40 or 50,000 Canadian for something like those things now. So I don't know. It depends on your perspective on affordable. For me, I would think like the tried and trues are always perfect. I think there's a huge amount of value in last gen, the Bangle, Clive Owen era Z4s.
Sure.
BMW Z4s, you can get a really stout 3 liter. There's only a few things that you really have to stay on top of. And if it's a secondary car, like a sports car, how much are you really going to be driving it? Like, it's not going to get the same mileage as your minivan or your SUV or your work car or something like that. So that's always an option. I don't think you can ever go wrong with a Miata.
Yeah.
Cheap, expensive. I mean, put the right tires on them. If you want to go hard and fast, spend as much on tires as you did on the Miata. If you kind of just want to get loose, then put them on something kind of skinny and hard and just enjoy the car. I mean, that's best selling, most raced car for a reason. I think there's huge value. The other one that I'm always a fan of is like I'm forgetting the chassis, but the last gen 135s.
Okay.
The little 2-door BMWs, but with the good engine, and you can get those with a 6-speed. They're pretty under the radar. They just look like a normal BMW.
Now, were those
Obviously,
turbocharged? Because the one M
I believe
was,
so.
Right?
Single. I think it was the 1 Series M. Yep. And then I think it depends on which engine. So in a 135, I believe it's a single turbo.
Right. Those are, I mean...
but just a lot of power, rear-wheel drive. They look okay. They're pretty subtle. If you don't buy like the hot orange one, then it's probably not as much of a ticket machine as some other things would be.
Right, for sure.
And just kind of nice to drive. And the nice thing is with BMWs, a lot of people own them. They share their engines across a lot of different BMWs, sometimes even Toyotas. And that way, I think if you're buying a car, especially if you're not a classic car collector or a deep-pocketed type, buy something that a lot of other people have bought, because there'll be forums, there'll be YouTube videos.
Oh, yeah.
You'll be able to do some of it yourself, or if you even can't do any of it, you can find out what's wrong and decide if it's something that you need to fix now or like next season.
I mean, that's why I drive a GTI as my daily. Like,
it's a great choice.
It's so much fun. It's front-wheel drive, obviously, but it's, parts are plentiful. The mods are limitless. APR's got 700 things you could throw at the engine.
Lots of tunes for
Yeah.
sure.
So it's been a blast. I'm frankly on my second one.
Those are killer cars. Yeah, I'm not a huge VW fan at all, but I love the GTI and the R are really incredible things.
Yeah, seems you're a Beamer guy, huh?
I don't know. I don't know that I'm necessarily a guy or not like anything. The other, I'm just now just spinning into avenues you could go for like a deal.
Right.
like the last gen Mustangs. You get a 5-liter for next to nothing. That's a ton of car.
Yeah.
Really, I've driven 2 of them, and both the person had done like bolt-on stuff on one of them, and it made a lot more power than it needed, and it needed good tires. And the other one, the guy literally bought he bought it secondhand for under 20 grand and put really good tires on it, like $2,000 worth of tires. And he's like, they only last a summer, but it's a really good summer.
Right.
and like, so I mean, those are great cars. And then it always depends on what you want to do. Like the Jeep is fun, but it's super slow. It's not that easy to drive. It's kind of bouncy.
Right.
But at least it's visceral. Like you're engaged in the process.
Oh,
it's
totally.
kind of agricultural.
Yeah.
But if you want to go fast, I think like a GTI, a Mustang. If you don't mind the way they look, the Camaros with any of the like sportier packages, the 2 LEs, the SS, those will cost more money, but they're a surprising car in terms of level of performance. They're not it's not a flashy car.
Yeah, they always lose me aesthetically 100%.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know, like it's always hard to try and talk about like stereotypes that attach to cars because it'll be different for someone in California than in Canada and in Ontario versus Alberta.
Yeah.
I mean, a really fast straight line Camaro is that's a hot thing in Alberta.
Yeah,
That's
same in North Carolina where I'm from. Like I grew up in North Carolina, so it's if you're not driving American muscle, like you're just an outsider.
Yeah. But like I think if your plan is to go like track rat, then one of those muscle cars that's a little bit past its prime is incredible because there's an endless amount of mods. You could go crazy on the suspension, and they're bulletproof otherwise. Big stout engines. If you like as a street car, you can go in any direction you want. I think get something without a roof, depending on where you live.
Yeah.
Maybe not in Vancouver, better off in Toronto, amazing in California. Last thing I toroed in LA was a 235M. And I mean, it didn't have a stick, would be my only complaint. Otherwise, that's a really incredible car. I've driven one of those a couple times. Throw the top down, head up Angeles Forest until the road was closed, of course, and then we came down one of a couple other canyons. It was a really, really great thing to use, and it's a broken record thing, but most of the time it's the tires. If you want more out of your car, spend some on the tires. Spend it on tires and spend it on driver training, because at least the driver training will move to other vehicles, and the tires will probably keep you alive when you overcook it. So
yeah, I had Michelin Pilot Super Sports on my last GTI, and then those, of course,
always buy the Michelins.
Went by the wayside, and now I've got the 4S on my current car, and they're unbelievable, man. I mean, it's so worth it. And
you're in a stable sort of weather scenario,
climate, yeah.
So like that those can just stay on the car until they're bald.
100%. It's a 4-season tire here.
Killer.
As you've been writing about both cars and watches, what do you consider to make a good article?
I guess I would answer it more in terms of how I read an article. With cars, it's a really easy answer for me. I need some sort of a story or something where the writer's voice is the strongest part, because we live in a time where by the time I get my car and driver, my road and track in the mail, I already know all the stats of the car. I know what the engine displacement is. I know how fast it is. Maybe it's already been on Top Gear. Maybe it's already been on 10 different YouTube channels. Maybe I've already had the car myself, but I want to know what Sam Smiths is saying about it. I want to know what Kyle's saying about it. Like there's a bunch of guys, and I kind of want that voice. That's, I think, what Top Gear made so special.
Right.
Is they made sure that there was always, like, they picked a great car, sure, but they always matched it with a huge personality. And I think the thing that you want to focus on if you want to get into this is like develop that voice.
Yeah.
Is what I would say. And it's something, try and have a story, try and have something that would lead someone to read all the paragraphs in the order you wrote them, rather than scroll around to see how big the case is or what the price is or whatever. But I think it's different. It's a different thing in terms of is it for a magazine? Is it for a blog post? Is it for Instagram? I think all of them kind of get a different level of filtering in terms of what makes it through to the final element.
Sure.
With a magazine, you could probably go with video. You can go like bigger on voice. You get eye contact or perceived eye contact, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think the big thing is you're writing about things that are just objects. They might have a great story. They might not. They might literally just be a new product or a new color, a new dial. It's pretty common in the watch world, or it could be a mid-model refresh for some car. And try and find some way where someone would want to actually read it. And I think you get there with kind of lots of personality, a perspective, and preferably something to say about the vehicle because you spent some time with it, or the watch.
Sure. Yeah, that relationship's pretty crucial, I think. What if you could sort of toot your own horn in a certain respect, is there any article that you're particularly proud of that you'd written, dating back to whenever you want, like go back however far?
I think it comes in different flavors, especially like if we're talking about watches. We have the weeks on the wrist, stuff that the bigger, which the flagship product for. I guess talking watches would be the flagship product. So the flagship editorial, single unit editorial product would be these weeks on the wrist. There's a video component. There's a lot of photos. There's a lot of research. And the thing that I like the most is there's like an in-depth assessment of the competition. So it could be 5 or 6 or 8 other options that someone who might be cross-shopping, especially if somebody's like well-read, what they might be cross-shopping. So sometimes there's some curveballs to people who know a Rolex but don't know some of the brands that you might blend against it, or a Tudor versus something else. And I would say the last couple weeks on the wrist turned out really well. But it's hard for me to toot my own horn because it takes 5 or 6 people to make that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like I may write the words, but then there's at least 2 or 3 people on staff that go through and make sure I didn't get a reference number wrong or miss a history on a watch that maybe I didn't spend the extra 10 hours researching. It's a team effort. And then you have the whole video team who produce and edit and make sure that I don't look like a complete buffoon, that sort of thing. And then you have the people that promote it afterwards and kind of live on in the commenting and everything. So that's tough. I mean, some of the stuff that's on the site lately, I really like, you could probably pick almost anything where the watch is a gold watch. That usually brings out the best or worst in me, depending on your opinion.
Yeah, we'll get into gold a little bit later. Sure.
I wrote a piece about my first watch not too long ago.
Yeah. Maybe
3-4 months ago. So it was this like Timex digital watch, and I had a really good time writing it. So I'll go from there. Danny Milton, one of our latest writers, he wrote his first watch about the Submariner from his dad, and he blew that whole concept out of the water. He definitely should have been first. Because I guess if he has to follow, I guess it's better for me that he followed me rather than the other way around, because his is a better post for sure. I had a really good time with mine. 2 entirely different watches, of course, but his had this like really deep, in-depth history. He's such a lovely guy. He has this like very like emotional long time connection with this watch and his father and his grandfather, and it's this great story. So I would say if we're tooting a horn, let's go with Danny's story. That was the good one.
Toot Danny's horn, yeah.
Sure.
That's fair. That's cool. I mean, any recommendation can be a good one. But you transitioned to full-time at Hodinkee, what, a year ago? Or
yeah, about that. Yeah, maybe a little over a year now.
So what was that transition like, going from like sort of part-time contributor to like full-fledged?
Yeah, so I was the position was, a kind of a set number of pieces or hours, and I made a move from Vancouver to Toronto, just to kind of cover some family concerns, be a little bit closer to the core, that sort of thing. And along with that, it just wasn't tenable. I couldn't be as good an employee as required for Nuvo. It's a very tight-knit group. If you held that magazine, you have no idea that there aren't that many people that somehow make it.
Oh, really?
They're just very good at what they do, and they have great relationships throughout their various industries. And I basically couldn't devote the same amount of kind of face-to-face or communicative attention to keeping that position. And so that position has essentially had to fade out, unfortunately. And it's probably one of the things I miss the most,
really,
about coming east. Is being able to write about cars and that sort of thing. It was a great job for some really great people, and the other way that I balanced out the work and the free time and that kind of thing was just to make an offer to Hodinkee. If they wanted more of my time, they could have it before I went back into a more traditional kind of freelance capacity with, say, the 35-40% of my time bought back by not having the car gig anymore. And they were more than happy to pick it up. So we've gone that route. And so far, I think it's worked out pretty well for both parties.
Sure. So you sort of pitched them in a way.
Yeah, well, I think that at this point, these people are some of my closest friends and certainly colleagues and everything. And it was just a question of, hey, you know, I don't have this anymore. Do you guys want more? Are you happy? And they're like, no, let's do more. So we're doing more.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice and easy.
Clearly, I've met several of you at this point, and you know, fortunately, so I go to New York every December and have for like the better part of 20 years. In December, just because being in Southern California, Christmas just doesn't quite feel like Christmas. So being from the East Coast and missing the cold weather and just wearing a jacket and a coat, you know, like that kind of thing. And lucky for me, very fortunately, happy coincidence, H10 fell on the weekend that I was going to be there. And obviously you and I guess that was our first face-to-face meeting, but
I believe so.
Man, it just everybody in that office is like the real deal. And I'm not just saying that to blow smoke or anything. I mean, obviously I've met with Innery and I've had Nick on the show and just like, and I've met Ben a bunch of times. Yeah. And it's just really nice to know that community that could otherwise be extremely exclusive and, you know, in that way of excluding people, it's such a warm, welcome embrace. And I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but it really is a community that's like very supportive and like everybody has each other's backs. And like you said, I mean, even I tried to get you to toot your own horn and you're like, well, 5 other people helped me do this. So it's like, if that's not proof in the pudding, I don't know what is, but it's awesome. It's a feel good feeling, you know? And yeah, I think that's awesome. Did you have to?
I mean, personally, I couldn't be blessed to work for like a better team.
Yeah.
You know, the leadership is very keyed in on what they want and where they think things will go. And I think so far they've been very right.
Yeah.
And then from a professional capacity, it's one of those things where you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I get to learn from like Joe Thompson, the industry professional. The only other guy with, holding the same credibility would be like Jack, and Jack is there too. John has this long-standing career and so much to learn from and a great perspective. And you get Kara's very savvy when it comes to all different elements of the business, and you can see that reflected in a lot of the products. And then I get to work pretty closely with Cole, who's had a similar sort of age run up as me, but has done it in whole different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And now we have Danny, and then I mean, what do you say about a guy like Steven? Like, I don't have this job without Steven. I don't have most of my confidence without a guy like Steven. Like, I worked kind of directly for him for a long time. And it's a really solid crew for sure.
Yeah, Steven's been such a sweetheart in answering random emails of mine too. That's
his method.
I emailed him about a blazer from one of the photo shoots that's in a recent story, and I'm like, Steven, you're the sartorial expert there in the office. I was like, what jacket is this? And he's like, oh yeah, that's pretty sure a bespoke Orazio Luciano. And I'm like, oh, I knew there was a reason I liked it. I mean, that literally happened yesterday. So that was cool. But I don't know. To our point, it's a fun group of people.
It's 50 plus people now. If you give me another couple hours, I could give you a tidbit on every one of them. But they're all monsters in their own right, and it's just one of those things where it's a rising tide always.
Sure.
And it's a scenario where in my position it's easy to be the laziest boat because you look good as everyone else is working so hard.
Right.
Yeah.
You've been like amazingly included in some of these talking watches and being able to host them. What's the selection process like for actually getting a guest on, like say David Robinson?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time the guests come to us. Or come to us through an intermediary, a friend that already knows, or similar. I actually Robinson was the one I hoped you didn't ask because I don't know how we found him or how he got in touch with us. But what a sweetheart!
Yeah,
what a great dude and a real treat for that to be. Yeah. I mean, a legend. That was a fun one because working in this industry, it's sometimes hard to call your parents and say like, hey, I'm doing this, and they're like, sounds really cool. And you're like, I'm going to go drive this car on this mountain. And they're like,
Right.
okay, fine. I've driven a car over a hill too. Like, come on.
Yeah.
But when you call and tell my dad, like, hey, I'm going to interview David Robinson. He's like, which, like the David Robinson? And you're like, yeah, you're like, and then suddenly they get it, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. Well, then how did Moki come about?
Moki came to us through a collector that he knows well, and probably would like to remain anonymous, as most collectors do. But yeah, just someone like essentially Moki was a pen pal with this guy, and that guy is also a friend of ours, and we were able to put those together. And I mean, again, what a dude! I mean, just the warmest, kindest, most capable, quick on his feet, like awesome. Really, really impressive guy.
So what's the situation though, just to add a little color to the Talking Watches, like kind of production. So you're flying out with like 2-3 people, you're getting a hotel, so the whole deal.
With something like Moki, I was already in San Francisco. And so we had Will, who kind of oversees a lot of what goes on the website, but certainly the video stuff. And then Gray, who's one of our producers and editors and super cameraman. He's, again, another multi-hyphenate. If you're seeing a pattern here, it's because it exists. These people, everybody's doing a few jobs. But those guys flew into Coronado, so San Diego, and then into Coronado. And I flew down. And yeah, we met up literally at his house, and we sat and chatted for a little while and set up some lights and some cameras, kind of do a run of show, a walkthrough, so that everyone's comfortable. And then you kind of turn the camera on and just start talking and try and think of things in terms of their edit points, and if you didn't quite get where you needed, how can you circle back without needing all of that recorded and that kind of stuff. So it's definitely not my skill set. It comes from the producer's side, is what makes it good. Will and Gray and David and Shahed and yeah, all of that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of like pre-production that goes into this, and weeks of emailing and arranging everything. But yeah, once as a host, you kind of just have to rock up and do just enough to get the person out of their shell and then stay out of their way.
Yeah, for sure. Are you a watch collector but having trouble finding something cool and unique? I mean, the last thing you really want is what everyone else has, right? Well, this is where my friend and former Standard H podcast guest Tim Jackson comes in. He and his wife Jana own Passion Fine Jewelry in Solana Beach, California, where you'll find an incredible assortment of independent watches waiting for you in their shop and online. And if you're getting engaged, have an anniversary coming up, or simply have another reason to buy jewelry, they have you covered. Passion Fine Jewelry also employs a goldsmith on staff for any custom desires, so you're able to go that route if you so choose. Visit Passion Fine Jewelry when you find yourself in Southern California, but they're also open 24 hours a day at passionfinejewelry.com. You can also find a wealth of information through Tim's blog, independentintime.com, where he covers anything independent watchmaking related, among a plethora of other information, so check that out as well. I've really enjoyed creating these podcasts on behalf of Standard H and sharing each of these personal stories with all of you. We each have goals, and it's the entrepreneurial spirit that inspired me to start the company. You can further support the brand and the podcast by visiting standard-h.com to pick up your choice of merchandise, and as always, thank you for listening. Lastly, if you have a moment, please rate and review the show. It makes a tremendous difference in keeping these things going. Now back to my conversation with James. You alluded to them. Let's talk gold watches, man. What is it about gold?
For sure. I don't know. I think it's more just like maybe a general boredom with steel. Like I think I've either handled or own or have owned most of the steel watches that I will ever be able to. You know, there's still some heavy hitters out there that I would love to be able to call my own, but probably never will. I mean, some of the prices have gotten just incredible. And I think that you start to see just things that feel different. You put them on, they make you smile. You're not really sure why. And you do that maybe 50 times and you start to realize, oh, maybe it's gold. And just kind of go from there. Like I guess I'm just kind of always chasing the interest point. And lately that's been kind of gold watches and the fact that they're mostly ignored by a large subset of people my age, our age, where it's about steel watches or titanium watches, simple sport watches, stuff like that. And then suddenly gold's only acceptable when it's a 5270 or something, you know, kind of old man bankery, Geneva royalty sort of stuff. And I think there's a whole world of interesting and fun things that can cost a lot, don't have to cost a lot, do sometimes cost an incredible amount of money. But yeah, I think there's just an interest level that's there.
So are you more into the yellow then? Not so much the
absolutely.
rose or like, was it ALS that has the honey gold?
Honey gold's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I do really enjoy the proprietary alloys. Hublot's got one. Omega's got Sedna. You have honey gold, which is rarely used, of course, pretty limited sort of thing. But yeah, for me, so far, it's been mostly, I think, especially if I was going to be buying for my own wrist, it's not that I like one or more than the other, but if it was just on the personal side, it would be yellow gold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something so sweet about a Longa 1, an early Longa 1 in yellow gold.
Yeah.
Royal Oak in solid gold, the dope gray dial.
See, John Mayer said it, but watches. I think AP does the rose gold better than anybody, I think.
Yeah, their stuff's pretty incredible. I would say Vacheron would be the other one, especially now that you can get the overseas ultra thin QP in blue dial, full rose gold with the rose gold bracelet. That would make it a contender basically anywhere. But then you see like that 37 millimeter Royal Oak chronograph in rose gold with the mixed finishing is a pretty highly evolved, kind of white subdial. So it's a good thing.
Where's the line drawn between cool and gaudy, however?
I think it's a mix of, you have that personal library you keep in your mind, and I'm sure you do this for cars. You might do it for clothes as well, where everything carries a certain stereotype, fair or otherwise, but it's usually not entirely unfair.
Yeah.
Because it's based on observation, especially when you're operating deep in a hobby. Those observations, you've made them thousands of times, so there's patterns. You start to see patterns. So, for me, I don't think that any watch in a vacuum is gaudy. And there's always aspects, like if you look at something that I might traditionally find gaudy, like a Jacob & Co. Astronomia, I don't really want it on my wrist, but give that watch 5 minutes in your person and in your sphere of visual, like where you can hold it and see it, it's something else.
Yeah,
just something so special. I don't know how you wear them. So like it's almost like they stop being watches at some point, and some stuff even to go into a brand that's not known for being gaudy, but like MB&F.
I was just about to say,
same direction for me. As can Beauvais, as can Purnell. You can list a lot of these ones where they make something so wild that it almost isn't a watch. And I think everyone's gut reaction, the like first thing comes out is they say like, oh, that's like a Russian party boy's watch. And you go like, okay, that might be one cohort that could financially acquire said watch, but that's definitely not the intent when they made this watch. They made it as a museum piece, as something incredible, like an amazing, multiple escapement pocket watch from the 1800s. It's in the same vein as that. It's just now we have this idea of marketing and international clientele and playboys on yachts that have these wild watches. And so sometimes watches get a bad rap, as do cars. Like we were talking about the Camaro previously, that car has lots of its own stereotypes that go with it, the Corvette as well.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be able to separate. And this is where I think the deeper you get into something like watches or cars, the more easy it is to separate the stereotype from the intrinsic values of the object. A Corvette is and always will be one of the finest sports cars in the world for the money.
Oh, for sure.
You can't take anything away from that. Do a lot of guys driving Corvettes, at least where I grew up, are in Hawaiian shirts with a gold chain, and
Are you talking about James Lambden right now?
I love Lambden. I don't know. Is Lambden into the gold chain life?
No. But I think we should start a GoFundMe for a chain for James.
The last time I hung out proper with James, 2 or 3 times ago, I'll tell you what kind of guy James is. We were at a party at Watches and Wonders in Miami, which I was covering for Hodinkee, and he was down there doing his thing. And I think I was actually in like my finest Hawaiian shirt.
Awesome.
And he had this gold GMT, solid gold GMT from, he'd correct me, but I want to say late 70s. And he ended up taking it off his wrist. I gave him my gold-plated Buren, which is on like a leather strap. And he's like, when are you in New York? I'm like, I got to go back to New York from Miami. He's like, well, let's meet up then. We'll have lunch, and you can give it back to me then. And so I got to do the Miami thing.
With the Rolex.
Working on my with the solid gold. Yeah, James is a king, for sure. One of my favorite people, such a sweet guy, and an incredible business as well with Analog Shift.
Yeah, for sure. He's a riot, man. Like
for sure.
When I was last in New York, We jumped in his M5 and rode around Manhattan.
Oh, I saw this on Instagram.
Yeah, that was
because he is
fun.
an E39, which isn't. It remains, despite the fact that more and more people know that it's an incredible performance sedan, remains a good buy.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best looking M5s personally. That my personal opinion.
I think yes, I would. Yeah, I mean, 34s are gorgeous.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, wrist check. What are you wearing right now and why?
I'm wearing the Aorus Diver 65 limited edition for Hodinkee.
My favorite.
Yeah, it's killer, and I'm actually wearing it because I'm just kind of going through everything in the case these days, and this had been on. I had sized the bracelet down for someone else to wear, and I hadn't worn it in a little while, a couple months maybe. So I popped it off the bracelet and put it on one of these Erica's Originals. It's like an elastic paratrooper strap.
I've only seen those online. They look great.
Yeah, they're incredible. Really nice people behind the brand, Erica and her husband. And it's basically, I joke, and I actually don't know if this is a joke that Erica would necessarily appreciate, but I hope she understands it comes from a good spot. It's like sweatpants for your watch.
Okay.
It's just insanely comfortable.
Right.
It also, because of where it puts the buckle, this is important to almost nobody, but because of where it orients the buckle, not only is it infinitely adjustable, which is the purpose of the design, there's no metal on the underside of your wrist to touch your computer, so I don't have to take this off. Whereas if I put a watch on with a bracelet, it's just grinding against my MacBook all day. I mean, you spend 10 hours at a laptop all day, and this I just find to be like a perfect work from home. It's normally this strap on a Doxa, but I threw it on the Aorus, and I'm not even sure it matches that well, but it just made me happy, and I've been wearing it for a few days. But the strap's comfortable enough to wear at night, like to fall asleep, and this has a lot more loom than any of my Doxas, so that's a plus as well.
Sweet. Yeah,
how about
it looks
you?
sharp. I think, the Aorus, what more can you say? I mean, it's really great, the Diver 65, but I feel like that gray bezel is just, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's nice and thin. It's minimal. The loom is great. And then, that gray bezel is pretty sick too. How about you? What's on wrist?
I'm actually wearing my OP No Date 36.
Oh, perfect.
Enery loves this watch, and
for sure.
So now I post
Enery
it, and
watch.
I always tag Enery anytime I post it.
That's great. Super.
Well, let's talk a little photography, if we may.
Sure.
You've shot everything from Canon AE1, right? Up to...
I have my A1 here.
Yeah. I had the same camera. It was my dad's. That was my introduction to photography. But you've shot everything from AE1 to the Leica Q2, right?
Yep. Yeah, so the film stuff is a more recent hobby for me. Actually, when I got into photography in earnest, it was with, Canon Rebels. And I shot on Canon for a really, really long... I mean, I still have a 5D Mark III and a proper macro lens for projects that require it. And I still maintain the body even just so I can use a 70-200 if you're shooting people or sports. When I went and did the Monaco Grand Prix last year, had the Q on one shoulder, which is absolutely my go-to camera. But if you need a longer lens, if you want another perspective, it's also a really incredible watch or a lens camera combination for watch spotting at sports events, because you get 200 in terms of reach and this great bokeh, and I still maintain that. And otherwise, the work camera, the everyday camera is a Q, which I adore, and was fortunate enough to get an option of buying a Leica refurbished model March of last year.
Sweet.
And since previous to that, I was shooting a Sony 6500. Mm-hmm. And I had broken that camera, or the lens that I like to use. So I was in the market for something else. I bought a Sigma 35-1.4 Art for the Canon. But the loss of a live viewfinder, a digital viewfinder, was a real change to the way that you shoot things like watches, or the way that I do anyways. So I was still just kind of in the market. And then I don't think I ever thought myself a Leica guy, or even necessarily had a super strong affinity for the brand. But when the option came up, I asked a few people who, use them for everything from normal family stuff to professional work. And they're like, you're an idiot not to try it at that price. It was it was half a retail price essentially. And I bought it, and I almost never put it down. I'm fortunate enough to have an M10.
Oh, wow.
That I also get to play around with, which is not mine. It's on loan from some friends. And then that's obviously super fun, but there's something just so easy and unobtrusive to the cue. I mean, it doesn't get in the way, especially after years of shooting larger camera systems.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the fixed lens is short,
Yeah. And like you want to shoot watches, it's a pretty incredible camera. I mean, anything I've shot on Hodinkee for the last year, I'd say like 95% of it was made with this camera. All the macro work was made with that camera.
Do you use it mostly on macro when shooting watches, or do you typically always? Okay.
Macro mode, I use a long sync cable, like a 25-foot sync cable to a flash, Canon flash that I have left over. So that way I can add in light. You can run the flash right on top of the camera. They use a similar hot shoe, so it'll still fire. Obviously, if you've ever used the wrong flash with a non-compatible camera system, it doesn't trigger TTL. So when you bring the viewfinder up to your eye for that wrist shot, it's jet black, because you have the camera setting believing that the light is as bright as the flash. So you get a split second where when you depress the shutter, it shows you hypothetical exposure. And then you fire with the flash, and then you make little adjustments. So that was a skill set that took me maybe 4 or 5 months to figure out. But I mean, as far as a camera just to kind of have under your arm when you're moving around, kids, family, travel, cars, it's great for cars. A little wide for cars, so you're going to get kind of close, and you're going to want to fix that in Photoshop. But it's not wide enough to be a problem because the lens is so accurate.
Well, you can still
and you're going to keep the car
frame,
in the center of the frame anyways. You can, for sure, and that's where my experience with the Q2, because it has so much more resolution, suddenly I use that crop feature. I don't use it on 24 megapixels, simply because I typically edit those images at their native resolution, 4,000-ish pixels. So I don't like to ever crop, especially not for a watch, unless your goal is to make macro very macro. Within the sense of a Q, again, when you're talking about macro, typically it's 2:1. The Q is not even 1:1, et cetera, et cetera. But it still functions because you can put the camera very close to something. So when they say macro, they generally mean the distance between the minimum distance between the subject and the sensor in which the lens will still focus. And I think that's what makes the camera useful for this purpose. But otherwise, it's like a small mirrorless. The battery seems to last a long time. Plus, it just takes like a very easily found and pocketed battery. So it wasn't hard to make the transition from the 6500 with a 24 millimeter Zeiss to a 28 millimeter Leica full frame. I just got a lot richer in terms of images and color control, and their raw files I really like. And
it's like that cinematic feel that I feel like they have. That's just
the light. There's an exciting factor to the light that isn't there in everything. It's never there on a cell phone, which is why I can't. As much as, you see a guy as talented as like a Ted Gashu, talking about how well you can get a photo on an iPhone, on a modern iPhone, and his photo looks lovely, of course. And then I'm like, oh, I can do that with my phone. And I go out and I'll take a couple snapshots. I'm like, I hate this thing. And you just want to slam it into the ground. Like, it's the thing I love with photography is like, there's no end point. You're never done.
Yeah.
And I love that you can move from one system to another. I can operate a Canon in the dark without turning the light on, like the backlight on or anything. I understand all that, which is really nice and super comfortable. And certainly if you were just getting into shooting watches or cars, that's where I would recommend the platform is. But at a certain point, I want way less gear. I want a smaller bag. I want less weight on my shoulder.
That's exactly why I went with that camera. And like knowing that we delayed our honeymoon, for example, so I was like, this is going to be on airplanes. It's going to be all over the place. I don't want to futz with lenses and all the rest of this nonsense. I can crop if I really need to. I mean, it's my vote for best travel camera ever.
I think it's probably quite simply the best camera, like overall camera for.
Yeah. Not to be too much of a fanboy, but I'm a fanboy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few other cameras out there that do similar things, but what you're paying for in the Leica is the glass, and that's what you're always paying for in the Leica. The form factor, the kind of aesthetic and style of it is ancillary to the fact that you would never get away with charging this much for a camera just because it looked good.
Right.
It also has to be something that a certain type of photographer really attaches to. And I maybe haven't found that connection yet in the few thousand frames I put through the M10. I'm really getting mentally used to, the always manually focusing and that sort of thing, which is with the Q, there's nothing, but it feels like you're not even holding a camera or using a camera, which is the plus. And the 6500 platform was like that too, but you spent similar money if you wanted similar glass. So, and at that point, you're dealing with much larger format because, of course, the lenses can be removed and changed and that sort of thing. So there's always there's a million ways to skin this cat in the world of cameras. I would say that for anyone listening who's either rolling their eyes about Leica or about more camera chat in general, if you want to get into shooting really great photos, anything after 2006 with a prime lens is probably good enough to put you on the cover of a magazine if you're actually a good photographer.
Right,
the camera's not going to be in your way. So a 5D Mark II would be awesome. Any of the similar full frame from Nikon, anything similar from really any, like, just think like a full frame with a big prime lens will never let you down. You're looking at, people roll their eyes at some of these early digital cameras because they are quote unquote outdated, but then these were also creating the cover of National Geographic during their time, or taking some of the most important wartime photography, or so it really comes down to the photographer. So shoot whatever you like, and really whatever gets you outside or whatever gets you holding a camera and pointing it at something, that's the right camera for you right now.
Yeah. I used to joke that 90% of photography is just being there. So
Always,
it's like, if you're not there, it doesn't matter what you're holding.
Nope.
But
yeah, it was Chase Jarvis who he had that whole book that was Instagram photos. It was all shot on the phone, early phones. So remarkable. I mean, Chase Jarvis is a fantastic photographer, but he said he was the guy that, I think the book was called The Best Camera is the One You Have With You.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's certainly a popular tagline.
For sure.
Well, let's talk about Grey Nato, your podcast.
For sure.
You have it with Jason Heaton, who is also a
The man.
Hodinkee contributor.
Mm-hmm.
It's described as a loose discussion of travel, diving, driving, gear, and most certainly watches. Do I have that right?
You got it. Yeah, you crushed it.
Okay. The cadence was off, but sorry.
It's practice. I've had 110 to do that.
So how did that exactly come about with you and Jason? I mean, obviously, did you guys just cross paths over watches, or was it a Hodinkee personnel meetup? Or
the first time that Heaton landed on my radar, my buddy Paul, who lives in San Diego, Paul Hubbard, he was buying or selling Tudor Pelagos to or from Jason. I want to say he bought Jason's Pelagos, but I would have to fact check that, as this is 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. And I had read Jason's stuff before, so I knew his name, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. Paul knows this guy. That's he does these really cool posts for Revolution and shows up on lots of other sites and stuff. And I had kind of admired his work. And then the connection came a few years later. It would have been my second year at Basel World, and we got connected through Mike Pearson, who at the time was kind of running all of the brand and marketing and everything for Bremont in North America. Mike, incredible at his job, and Bremont would not be anywhere near the scale that they are now without Mike, nor available at so many different retailers throughout the U.S. But yeah, he made the connection. I had gotten to know Mike through Bremont and actually an event in Toronto. So this predates even my time in Vancouver. I drove out from Hamilton to Toronto to a thing with 40 so watch dudes from around the Toronto area, where they got to go hands-on with some Bremont stuff. And this is how the brand used to do kind of outreach into the watch community. So this is a time zone thing. So
I met Mike last year, actually, at a Bremont event in LA that I drove up for, and I was he's in Texas, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah, Mike's an absolute sweetheart, and Mike made the intro and made sure that we were at the Bremont booth, which was in the Palace, which was an ancillary kind of fancy tent in the Basel, in the parking lot space, kind of near Basel World. So that's where they used to put every brand from. It could have been Bremont to MB&F, Graham, all sorts of independents. It was a cool spot. And for the few years that the Palace was running, it was kind of the spot to be, because they had good bathrooms, which was not always easy to find at Basel World, and it had an even more chill atmosphere. Obviously, once you're in the Bremont booth, everything's very chill. Those guys are, by nature, that whole company is very kind of easygoing and just kind and that sort of thing. And yeah, Mike made the connection with Heaton, and we got chatting. pretty constantly online, just became like tight that way. And I'd always wanted to do a podcast. It's been my favorite media since university, since the very early days of Adam Curry.
Yeah,
and
old school.
Leo Laporte and Kevin Rose and all these guys, that transitioned out of a television tech environment into just doing their own thing because they understood the metrics of the distribution method. So yeah, I used to pore over stuff like This Week in Tech and really anything I could find. And then I remember when podcasts suddenly became part of iTunes. And it was like you didn't have to find everything on your own like an RSS.
Right.
And yeah, it had been just my most favorite medium. I really like a passive medium. It engages one side of my brain. My hands can do dishes or be driving, or really I can do anything other than read.
Yeah.
And I, probably podcast is the reason I got really good at photo editing and that sort of thing, because it allows you don't have to be that patient. I have one type of entertainment coming at me and I can kind of do something on a separate side. And I absolutely love it. And I found kind of a kindred spirit in Heaton where his perspective is different than mine, but not in a way that clashes.
Right.
And I love a different perspective. I love being able to have a perspective from someone who's had such a varied life. And when it was clear that we were kind of locked in on what we thought the program could be, I made sure he had a microphone and we started recording.
That's awesome. So when did you sort of consider it a success? Or did that never really enter the kind of equation?
I don't think I ever had a goal for it. So I think making it was the success. I think I did this very much as a passion project. I did it because I had to put a podcast out. I felt like I had listened to so many. And that we were, between Heaton and myself and really just everybody in this industry, and I'm sure you're even more privy to this because you dip into so many different fields, but there's always these interesting conversations are always going on. And at a certain point, there's just a proactive element to making it available to the greater community. And when I realized that the tone of Heaton's conversation that I would have with him was always very positive, and we focused on things we liked versus things that we hated or things that made us angry or sad or confused, it seemed like something that we could put into the industry that would be more uplifting rather than cutting or derisive. And I think there's times for both. I'm just not that qualified to... I can only operate from the anger, confusion, sad sphere for so long, and then I burn out really hard.
100%.
Whereas if you're coming to things every week, and it used to be every other week, but currently we're doing them every week. If you're coming to them with kind of like there's like a renewal of energy, like a wave, and I think that's the reason the show has worked so far, and the audience is nicely engaged. We still respond to every email by hand, which has become a task, but it's not something I'm willing to give up yet. And yeah, we're 110 episodes in tomorrow.
That's amazing.
So I don't know when this episode will go live, but this is Cinco de Mayo, May 5th.
Happy Cinco de Mayo, us drinking whiskey.
Thank you. yeah, appropriate.
Yeah, no, it's
Or
all
not.
good. For those looking to start their own podcast, for example, like in your setup, you guys are in 2 different cities. You each have microphones, and we don't have to go through the technicalities of it all. But like early days, did you guys like split the cost of the equipment, or was it just like hey, let's just do this, and I'll buy everything and ship it to you? How did you guys start?
I mean, the first cost was like a Blue Yeti Pro mic. So like we're talking about like $130 to get this off the ground. We went with a free SoundCloud account. So there was no risk until we had more than 6 hours or something. And then they wanted a pro account, which again is like I know the Canadian price, like $145 a year. So it's probably $120
$10
US.
bucks a month. Yeah.
$10 a month, something like that. Yeah. But I mean, the costs were so low. And I think with these kind of things, I just wanted to show that like I was committed to the idea. I'll send you a mic. And then it was just a question of like, the mic isn't even, I don't even think the microphone's the biggest issue. Obviously audio quality is crucial, but having something to talk about, having a plan. And if you don't have a plan, then the lack of a plan has to be intentional. Right. You can't come in on a middle ground and just like turn the mics on and think that you're going to make something. Some people are like, if you turn the mic on with a Lambden, you'll get something every time. I'm just not like that. I like to have a little plan, some level of production beforehand. And luckily that linked up nicely with the way that Heaton likes to work and operate in a specifically thoughtful manner when we approach these shows. So I would say the big thing is if you're getting into podcasting, like understand what the schedule is going to be. If you're producing weekly, this will quickly become your part-time job. unless your show has literally no editing, and there is no rules. That's what's great about this. You don't have to edit it. The audio quality doesn't have to be good if you don't want it to be or you don't care. I care fairly extensively, but quickly learned that there's a break point where nobody noticed the differences because they're all listening with Apple earbuds.
Yeah, I had that conversation 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so I master on a great pair of headphones with multiple, like I have a compressor for me. I have a different compressor I designed for Heaton's voice. It's all recorded locally and then hand cut together. I remove pauses. I remove mitigative speech if I find that it's annoying. If I'm listening, passively making notes, and I hear me say, I used to cut it all out. You can go back to old episodes. There's not a piece of mitigative speech. There's no weird pauses. There's none of it. And I've learned to like live with some of it as being human.
Sure.
And also because I quickly realized that like if it took me 6 or 7 hours to make 1 hour of audio, it's just untenable. Like I have to be able to close the edit on a show in 2 hours because then it's another hour in notes. It's another hour or so in the CMS rebuilding the post for Hodinkee. It's another 45 minutes making and planning the social media. And like it needs to come into one unit of work day.
Yeah.
Otherwise, especially weekly, it's untenable.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, so you guys merged, I guess, is that the right term with Hodinkee or they bought you or like what was that?
No, I mean, all we wanted to do is, what I thought was missing was my ability to occasionally pay Heaton some money for his time. And I don't like selling ads. I don't really know that much about the ad business. It's not a strong suit of mine. And it's so far removed from being a strong suit of mine that it is the kind of thing I would task somebody else with. And the option came up of essentially making a distribution ad deal. So we still retain complete autonomy for the show, even down to what advertisers are selected. But the normal ad team at Hodinkee is able to sell our show as an additional product in that portfolio. And so certain types of brands that are looking more for travel, adventure, driving gear, and sometimes watches might come our way.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me asking, like what is the advertisement relationship like now as opposed to like early days? Like, for example, I'll just straight up tell you, the advertisers I have for this were either product donations or it was quite literally early on. I was like, I will have you on every episode for X amount of dollars, and that went towards buying all my equipment. Now I don't have any ads, right? And it's something I'm exploring, but I also understand that this is a branded podcast too by Standard H, which is its own brand, so inherently that's an advertisement. But really this is nothing more than just a community building exercise, frankly. Yep. But like, what is it like for Grey Nato then? Like, how do you determine?
I mean, for Grey Nato, occasionally a brand will want to sponsor an episode, or usually it's 2 episodes, and we'll basically say like, what we don't really like doing is hard ad reads. They're boring. So we try and stick with brands that we already understand, the products we already understand. We make a hard delineation when it is an ad break, because I also don't like the ones that the podcasts that just kind of leave the narrative and drop directly into an ad with the same person's voice, and you're kind of like, is this an ad? And then they're like, so you should definitely use my promo code. And you're like, okay, it is an ad. I got you. I'm not against anyone making money or selling ads. I like there to be some sort of delineation in the format. And with Heaton and I, it's just a loose conversation about the product. So it'll be something that we already know and understand and preferably like and have, put our own money into. And we'll do a kind of call out at the top of the show. This episode's brought to you by whomever is Standard H. And in the middle of the show, we might talk about a favorite episode for 2 or 3 minutes. And then at the end on the sign out, don't forget that this episode was proudly brought to you by Standard H.
Yeah.
And we go that way. So that's basically the metric from our standpoint. From the ad sales standpoint, I think that the Grey Nato kind of exists in a portfolio of ad solutions that Hodinkee now has. It gives them another place to offer value. But I think the premier product is still Hodinkee Radio when it comes to that kind of thing, and that's my guess is where most advertisers want to go. So we run ads on maybe 20% of shows.
Okay.
When it comes up, it's not something that like it has to cover the bills, doesn't have to pay for anything. If that was the route, I would absolutely just do a Patreon. Keep the show ad free, have the community support the show with a relatively small sort of donation where maybe you would get an extra episode a month, or the Q&As would just be for Patreon members or something like that. You could figure that out. Lots of other podcasts have done that. And I spend a not insignificant amount of money a month supporting the podcast that I really like. So I wouldn't have a problem turning around and asking for the same, but only if it came to the point where I needed it, not where it was just like another line item where I was able to make money off someone.
Yeah. Like, all that stuff's like, I've made zero money pretty much off of it, and that's fine. But I will say that I did add a button on my website for like $5. So like, if you're picking up a T-shirt, you could throw in an extra 5 spot for
for sure.
support, that kind of thing. Well, just to get back to it a little bit. So you're a photographer, a writer, you produce and host a podcast. Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
No, I don't think so. Like, I don't run a business. I actually don't, like, it's something that I do struggle with a little bit, is like, I don't have an outlet to suddenly turn some level of philanthropy, which I think is another hallmark of a genuine entrepreneur, is not only the ability to grow his own community, but then give to all the ancillary communities, his or her, sorry, it was rude. So no, I think I would like to say that I'm on that trajectory. But I think what I do now is more of like a mixed creative sort of work. And I also think it's not uncommon. There's a lot of people out there that have a podcast and write for a blog and do it. It's just a question of, I guess, what can I learn from this? What can it kind of, I think it's really important these days, especially now, if you look at the current scenario, but again, who knows when this will necessarily be posted. So it's something to consider, like, what's your 3-year plan? And I think 5 is almost too long. If I look at who I was 5 years ago, it's like the math has changed. You know what I mean? In terms of all of my actions and a lot of my self-awareness. And I think 3 is a more realistic number, where in 3 years, with a lot of hard work and dedication, a gainfully employed individual could probably save up for just about anything, but down payment on a house or whatever. I think in 3 years, you could get a BA. In 3 years, you could become, not an expert, but definitely a proficient player in almost any skill. You could become very good at cooking. You could learn the piano. So I think 3 years is a nice metric for that. And it's always about like what the 3-year plan is. And certainly I think there's a lot of growth on the horizon for Hodinkee and for Grey Nato and for all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Touching sort of more on your life, sort of big picture, like you travel a ton. What is life sort of like on the road? I mean, obviously, you're not just a traveling salesperson. Like, I've been that guy before in my car, road warrior, going from office to office. I mean, I used to be in orthopedic sales, so I used to hawk medical equipment.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So a lot of miles in the car and that sort of thing. You're on like airplanes and doing Airbnbs and Turos and such.
Not as much as some other people. You see people do the count every time they're on another plane. And I think last year, and this includes like most of my travel last year, was short haul stuff to New York from Toronto. But it's probably like 70 or 80 flights a year. But when I was still in the car circle as well, so it was a lot of press trips, and you could do 70 or 80 by summer if you really wanted to. Like it just depends on how much time you really had. And I have family obligations. I have people who need FaceTime. Like actual meaningful FaceTime. So you can't just be on the road permanently. I'm not, I know some people in the car industry that, don't have a home, and they just move about from one kind of, whether it's a press trip or, a short stay in Airbnb, something like that. But yeah, I think I aspire for maybe less of that, but it to be more quality in the future.
Sure.
I also, with the current scenario, I have literally no clue what travel will look like for the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. You have kids, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I got two
historically, what's been the method to that madness to keep in touch with them on the road? Has it been like most people just found out about Zoom? Like, is that something you've been using or?
No, just like FaceTime, video calls, that sort of thing. And I mean, like they're young, so I don't, if you look back 2 years ago, it was 2 kids under 4. Like they don't really notice if you don't call. I notice. So yeah, it's more a question of when you're around, be 100% there. Like actually don't be around, but also doing all your emails or that sort of thing. Like try and be present. If they want to go to the park, there's time to go to the park. You have to just make time. And it's a question of priorities, and it's something that I've gotten super wrong sometimes. And you just learn. I mean, I definitely am not a natural parent, so it's something I learn every time I go around it. So
sure. You're wearing, going back to the watch thing real quick, you are wearing the Aorus LE from Hodinkee. Mm-hmm. Would that classify as your favorite limited edition from Hodinkee, or do you have another favorite? The money, no object.
I thought the Laurent Ferrier was pretty cool. The Traveler.
Yeah.
The Skipper.
Yep.
Tag is a brand that I don't necessarily have a strong emotional connection to all of their products. Mm-hmm. But classic Carrera cases, and then into the CH1180s, the gold Carreras, that race car drivers were given by Jack Heuer. That kind of stuff is rad.
Incredible.
And then I thought the Skipper, and there's a couple people in the office that have the Skipper, so you see it every few months, maybe, if you're lucky. And that's a really, really special, really fun watch. I thought the Hermes GMT was crazy cool. Maybe not my personal style, but like if I could have found some way for it to, I mean, I don't have the money for it either, but insanely cool. Maybe too cool for me is how I would say that. And then that Blancpain from last year, the Diver.
Yep.
It's a perfectly sized diver with an incredible movement, really beautiful, like top tier sport watch finishing. Heaton's got one, and it's perfect. So that's a great watch. There's been so many. That's a really tough
pull. The Vacheron. I think the Vacheron might be my favorite. And that might be my favorite Cornavache ever, for that matter.
It would be it would be definitely in my top 3 for sure. I mean, I think that steel case, the gray dial, is it's a killer thing. That's a really good one. Man, you could go for a while, because I don't think we've had any real duds, at least not in my scope. I thought that that Resonance with the skeletonized dial, if you've ever seen that in person, it's crazy cool.
Not in person.
That Resonance is like the Hermes, but in a different direction, where I'm not cool enough to wear the Resonance either. It's like I would need to be like an architect with cool glasses or something like that. I don't have that bit, but I think that it's been a really impressive run, and I think that's a testament to the leadership at Hodinkee and to the designers. Whether it's a really like, you go back and look at that webpage that we produced for the Hodinkee edition Leica M10.
Right.
And that webpage was as cool as the camera. I mean, like I guess maybe it's something that you and I would have a little bit more of a mindset to see, but just the level of presentation. And those are the same people that are designing the watches. Like, this isn't a fluke. They don't just get lucky. They're talented. And they do good work. And it's nice because you're working with brands that already have this incredible DNA, and you're making like little massages that are all reflective of like now several generations of like collector and taste input that circles the whole brand.
100%. All right, so I've asked a couple people this question, so definitely going to include you, being a car guy. Money, no object, 3-car garage, fill it.
Well, I mean, it'd be an F1, 250 short wheelbase. And, I haven't driven a 250 short wheelbase either, but I have them on very good authority as being the best. I haven't driven an F1. I've been in an F1. I would say like a sort of dumb fast SUV.
Yeah.
Like either a Jeep JL with a Hemi, or one of those Bowler Defenders.
Yeah.
Where they hot up a truck that never should have been hotted up.
Yeah, it's so funny, the Defender thing, because like so many people forget it's like legitimately a tractor.
And they're slow. The Jeep is slow. I mean, like it took me some time when I got mine, and mine's the 3.8. So if Jeeps is a 2011. It's just slow. It's a stick. It doesn't want to do anything quickly. It's very agricultural. And it's my understanding that the Defender's the same, but slower.
Yeah.
Most of the time. And obviously they made some, like that final edition they made, the 90 that was red with the 5-liter engine. Something like that would be bonkers. The Spectre edition that they made 10 of or 25 or something like that.
With like the ropes. Yeah.
That like Harry Metcalf's got one of those.
It's so good.
Actually, I think it's tough because I think you need a 60s Ferrari because I think that's the pinnacle of its form, like a 250 short wheelbase, a 275 GTB, even like a 330. But I think a 250 short wheelbase or GTO, I guess if you wanted. But I think that like at a certain point, like an $80 million cars, that's no object to anyone.
No big deal.
Yeah, an F1 would be up there. A really early 7.3 Zonda with a stick. I grew up PlayStation, man. So Zonda's hit in Gran Turismo on PlayStation 2, and that two-tone, the black roof, the full silver Zonda, like a 7.3 Cinque. That would be. I have to imagine that for whatever that car may lack, it would only gain in character or excitement. So that would be fun.
Yeah.
A DB5.
Oh yeah.
DB4.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
It's kind of endless, but yeah, like a three car, it would need like something insane and semi-modern like an F1, something insane and vintage like a 250, and something you would actually drive. So that could be an E63S, like a wagon. It could be like a RS6. It could be a really cool like overland Jeep or something like that. I think there's lots of options there.
What? So we're drinking bourbon whiskey. You're having Buffalo Trace, right?
I am, yeah.
What is that your go-to?
It's what's easily found around here. It's nothing special. I mean, that's your usual at the bar as well. Like you can always find Buffalo Trace just about anywhere. Buffalo Trace or Bullet. I'm not too picky when it comes to that.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I've got Bullet for sure. What do you have a favorite, however?
Yeah, anything from Willet. Just go nuts. Yeah, Willet. I mean, you're not going to find Pappy that easily. It's also kind of like that's your 250 GTO Ferrari F1 answer. Or McLaren F1 answer, but yeah, Willet has never let me down. I've had a chance to have just a few experiences with it, and just incredible.
Yeah. What? So why do gummies make the best snacks?
Oh man, it depends. It depends on your general level of self-loathing because it's barely real food, right? But yeah, I don't know. I definitely love gummies. I really, and I don't have that much of a sweet tooth. Like you won't ever see me eating ice cream or cake or anything like that. No, I'll make an exception maybe once a year for some apple pie. But yeah, no. Typically, I'm a savory guy. I'd go in for chicken wings before ice cream, even if even if it was dessert chicken wings. But yeah, something about gummies, and if you find the right ones, it's probably a childhood thing.
Yeah.
In that little town where I grew up, there was a bakery called Jones, still is, and they used to do, and they may still, I haven't been in there in 20 years, but they had like a penny candy desk where you could go up and say, I'll have 10 of those, I'll have 10 of those. They put them in a little paper bag.
Yeah.
And you leave and walk home and eat your candy, and we would do that on the occasional Saturday. So it's probably that sort of thing.
Oh, that's the best.
Yeah.
What have you done recently for the very first time?
Yeah, I would say the most recent thing that I've gotten into is because of COVID, and even before that, simply because the weather is unstable in Toronto. Typically, just when you're talking about like it gets cold here, would just be I've gotten into using a stationary bike.
Oh, sure.
Not that interesting of an answer. When I lived in Vancouver, my favorite was to run, and then on days I didn't run, a simple weight routine keeps you pretty sharp. Certainly good enough to travel and that sort of thing without too much cost, but. The running here is fine this time of year, but of course I'm not leaving the house without a legitimate excuse, simply because there's so many other people who feel the need to be out running that it makes me nervous, I guess.
Right, sure.
So yeah, just a bike, and you can watch someone else bike up some pass in Italy with some metrics on the screen, or you can just put on a movie or a TV show and try and hit a certain heart rate on the Garmin and go that way. So that's probably one of the more recent things I've gotten into.
Yeah, for sure. What's something about you that not many people know? Like what's a James Stacey ism that like even somebody close to you may not even know?
I mean, I think all the good stuff is out there. I think that if you were to spend a lot of time with me, people who spent time with me on the road, people who have been fortunate-ish enough to call me maybe a significant other, I'm like problematically moody.
Oh, really?
Oh, for sure, yeah. So I have good days, I have bad days, I have like days where I'm not getting out of bed. It's there's like a wide swing, and it takes a little bit of artwork of podcasts and exercise and lots of coffee to kind of like find like a steady rhythm somewhere in between the vacillating poles. But yeah, I don't know. I would say that I'm probably one of Lana Del Rey's biggest fans. That would be the other one that maybe people. I put some of it on my Instagram.
Yeah. I mean, you have, but I would say not many people probably know that about you. I think that's probably a really good one, actually.
Yeah, I have a strong weakness for like female lead singers, whether it's Hearts or Mr. Little Jeans, which is from your neck of the woods now, or Churches or First Aid Kid, or the list is kind of goes on forever. But certainly Lana's way up there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, listen, man, I won't take up any more of your time. This has actually been a lot longer than even I dreamt of doing it, so I really appreciate you taking the time. Oh, that's awesome.
But it's a treat to catch up with you.
Yeah, likewise. And hopefully, sooner than later, we can do it over
That'd be great.
Some Scotch neat in the city.
Yeah, for sure. Somewhere we'll catch up somewhere. Maybe just the December travel. Yeah.
Come to San Diego. I told Cole before. I was like, come to San Diego anytime you want.
Oh, Cole loves to get around. I wouldn't be surprised if he knocks on your door someday.
Dude, I got a guest room. My door's open.
That's great.
All right, James. Well, listen, man, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure, dude. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah.
All the best.
All right, let's catch up soon.
Yeah, you know it.
All right, see ya.
I'd like to thank James once again for taking the time. Super fun to catch up. Looking forward to seeing you next time I'm either in New York City or perhaps a meetup here in LA. Thank you to Clear Audio for the noise-canceling headphones, as well as to Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for providing the theme track. Stay tuned in another couple weeks for another episode of the Standard Age podcast. I appreciate you guys listening as always, and I'll catch you then. Take care.